This is a partially censored re-upload of the Stewardess Call Girl Slave Ring. The original story and original video feature a brief, ridiculous but explicit sex scene that I have cut from this version. You can find the uncensored original at the link below in the description, hosted on Vimeo.
Valencia Hills, California, July 26, 1971. I was the only one that got off the train. The only one on the platform was the town marshal. He clanked toward me looking like Wild Bill Hickok in his chaps, spurs, and 10-gallon hat. He had to have a gun of some sort on him somewhere, but I couldn't locate. His face as straight up and down as a red brick, and his eyes looked like black raisins poked in it. Got business in Valencia Hills? Yeah, I'm looking for a girl, I said, taking Adele Hopkins' picture from my pocket. This girl. She was wearing her Mountain Atlantic Airlines uniform. It was a black and white shot, so you couldn't see she had red hair, but you had no trouble seeing she was all dull anyway. The marshal said, "We got a few of them down at Comanche Street. You can come take a look if you want." Comanche Street turned out to be the name of the town jail. He drove me over in his Jeep. It took us through the neatest, cleanest streets I'd ever seen. The few people we passed were neat and clean, too. And the closest thing I saw to a hotspot was a movie theater showing The Sound of Music. As we drove, he told me his name was Jesse Thomas, and then he gave me his philosophy of life. Drugs is sapping the lifeblood of America. Long hair and homosexuals and all this other freak stuff is making us easy prey for the red overthrow. We don't hold with any of that pervert crap in Valencia Hills. Anyone wants to come and live the clean life with us, we're glad to have him. But anyone that's into drugs and using his body for dirty purposes, he ain't welcome here. And we got ways of letting him know it. I said, I'm not figuring on staying here long enough to test any of the local ordinances. All I want to do is find this girl and bring her back to New York. If I can do that, I won't even be here long enough to get one of your streets dirty by spitting in it. She's a relative? No, she's a missing person. I've been hired to find her. I'm a private detective, Harry Franklin. She running away from her family? No, she met a guy on one of her flights, and they shacked up in a hotel in New York that night. The next morning, they were gone without her telling her friends anything about it, and she hasn't been seen since. That was 6 days ago. It's her friends that are paying me to find her. Why are you looking for her out here? He asked. What makes you think she's out here in Valencia Hills? I told you she met the guy on one of her flights. Well, I checked the passenger list, and his name is Leon Appleton, and his permanent residence is listed as Valencia Hills. The girl must have been with him. We don't have no Leon Appleton here, Thomas said positively. I know everyone in this town to talk to personally, and we don't have no Leon Appleton. We were at the Comanche Street jail by then, a squat square building, old-fashioned but clean. Beyond it were the slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains with snow gleaming white on their peaks. We went inside, and a beefy deputy wearing his own cowboy getup came out saying, "That you, Jesse? Take this man downstairs and show him what we got there. He's looking for a missing woman. I'll be in the office seeing if I can find anything that'll help him." I followed the deputy down a flight of stone steps to the basement. At the bottom he shouted, "All right, up on your feet and under the light, you pervert queers. This man wants to take a look at you." There were about 7 or 8 hippies in a wire cell. They were a pretty scruffy lot, clothes ripped up and dirty, and most of them bruised up around the face. There were 3 or 4 girls in with them, and even without their getting under the naked light bulb, I could see none of them was Adele Hopkins. I said, "She's not here," but the deputy was getting himself all steamed up because they hadn't gotten up the way he'd told them to. "I told you queers to get up on your feet," he shouted. When they didn't move, he ran to a window opening out onto an alley and began reeling in a heavy hose. He reached outside to turn a faucet and sent a high-pressure stream of water blasting into the cell, knocking the prisoners around like 10-pins, banging them up against the bars, scuttling them around for places to hide, even though there weren't any there. I could hear them shouting for him to turn it off, but he was having too much fun. "A little water won't hurt you. Get some of that dirt off here." I got up next to him and put my mouth to his face. It caught him off balance and swung him around over the back of a chair, and I grabbed the hose out of his hands and directed it in the seat of his pants. When he stopped hopping, he tumbled into a corner of the room, hollering for me to let up on him. I played the hose all over him from a foot or so away. And when he looked like he was going to drown, gasping and spluttering, I turned the hose off and began wrapping it around his neck. I was in the process of putting a knot in it when Thomas came downstairs. "What's the trouble? What's going on here?" he exploded. "What," I asked, "do you get around here for interfering with an officer in the lawful performance of his duty? $10? All right, here it is." I took a $10 bill out of my pocket and handed it over. Thomas didn't in the end seem particularly bothered by what happened. "You look like a fool." "I got some pictures upstairs," he said to me, "of everyone we've had in here. I didn't see anyone like the woman in that picture, but you can take a look yourself if you want." As I started out after him, one of the girls spoke from the cell. "They'll beat the hell out of us as soon as you're gone, mister. That big horse you tied up in the hose can't wait to start stomping us." "What are they in here for?" I asked Thomas. "Vagrancy. No visible means of support." "How much?" "Heck, we don't want to make any money out of them. We just want them out of town. Give me 100 and you can have them." I handed him over a 50, 2 20s, and a 10, and he motioned for the deputy to unlock the cell. As we went upstairs, they came along behind us, and as I went into Thomas' office with him, the prisoners filed outside the building. Thomas gave me a book of prisoner snapshots and sat swiveling in his chair behind the desk until I'd finished looking through it. "Looks like she's never been here, don't it? I guess maybe you came out here on a wild goose chase. What are you going to do now?" I shrugged and got up to go. I went out of the building and was surprised to see the hippies sitting on the steps outside waiting for me. The girl who had talked to me from the cell was waiting to talk to me. She stood up as I came toward them and said, "That was nice of you. They would have stomped us all right. Did I hear you say you're trying to find someone?" I showed her the picture, this girl. She looked at it and handed it back to me, shaking her head. "I never saw her, but that doesn't mean anything. The day we got here, 2 ugly little men asked me if I wanted a job as a hostess at a fabulous ski resort. The work would be easy and the tips would be great because our clients would be well-heeled businessmen. Maybe the girl you're looking for got into that some way or other." I asked if she remembered the name of the resort, and she said she didn't because she wasn't interested in the job. "How about Sierra Vista? Does that ring a bell?" "Yes," she said. "That's the name they gave me." "Well, maybe we're finally getting somewhere." It had been just a week earlier that 9 stewardesses from Mountain Atlantic Airlines came to my office on East 54th Street in New York City. They were wearing their neat blue MAA uniforms with silver wings on their caps and collars. They added up to 3 blondes, 3 brunettes, 2 black girls, and an Oriental. "We'll come right to the point, Mr. Franklin." Betty Harrison, a blonde girl with long, tapering legs, had been appointed to do their talking. "We're all stewardesses with MAA, but we have a private business of our own, too." I said, "Give me 3 guesses what it is." 1, you've got a little call girl operation going. 2, you've got a little call girl operation going. And 3, you've got a little call girl operation going. "My, aren't you clever?" she said. "Yes, we've got a little call girl operation going, and one of our little call girls is missing." "Tell me about it," she said. She and another stewardess, Adele Hopkins, had been handling an MAA flight from San Francisco to New York 5 days earlier. They'd made a contact with 2 prosperous-looking men on the plane, businessman types, and gone with them to a luxurious suite in the Hotel Gascar on 5th Avenue. Adele Hopkins' date had given his name as Leon Appleton, and he had taken charge of the party, getting a fine meal along with the best champagne sent up to their suite. The 4 of them had eaten together, but then they'd split up into couples, and each of them had taken one of the bedrooms. The next morning, Betty and her date had knocked on the door of the other bedroom. There was no answer. When they went in, they found it deserted. "That was 4 days ago, and we haven't seen or heard from Adele since." "Isn't it possible this Appleton offered her a good deal of some sort and she just went off with him?" I asked. "Not a chance," she said. Several of the others nodded agreement. "Oh, he kept telling her she ought to quit MAA and take a job as a hostess with a new ski resort he was interested in called Sierra Vista.
But Adele just laughed and said he shouldn't hold his breath that long.
Tell me something about the two guys. Were they friends? Were they together on the plane?
No, they didn't seem to know each other at all. They only went into the date together because they could see Adele and I were sort of a team. My date was kind of a quiet dude, the paper on the wall type, but Appleton was full of jokes and had a lot of personality.
What about the condition of the room Adele and Appleton were in? What was it like when you went in the next morning? Any signs of a struggle? Or of violence?
No, just the unmade bed and Adele's little valise.
She thought for a minute.
But I remember there was kind of a medicine smell, and someone had vomited in the sink.
You didn't talk to any of the personnel in the hotel. You didn't ask if anyone had seen them leave.
In this line of work, the one thing you don't do is make waves with hotel personnel. You need them too much for getting your rooms and for warning you if you're going to be broken in on or anything like that.
I thought a few minutes trying to get the feel of the thing in my mind. I'd had to bring in some chairs from other offices to accommodate them all, and everywhere you looked you saw another pair of great legs. Crossed, with those little MAA skirts giving you a good view of thigh. They sat quietly watching me for the most part, but the Oriental, Tony Webster, was filing her nails. Actually, I could see she was a good deal of a mixture, taller and longer legged than most Orientals, and with no trace of an accent in her raspy voice. Well, I said, there's enough to get started on. Now, of course, the question of money comes in here, my fee and my expenses. I won't be able to itemize it until the job's done, but I figure $5,000 if the job takes a month or less, $2,500 now, and another $2,500 in 2 weeks. They went into a huddle to talk it over and decided to accept. But when I saw Betty Harrison start writing a check, I said, it's got to be cash, ladies. It's kind of a paranoia I have. Checks make me nervous. So they got around my desk and started pulling money out of their bags. It came out in 10s and 20s. Arrears started adding up to a pretty good pile, but when they'd put out everything they had, they were still $300 short. So they went into another huddle, and when they came out of it, Betty Harrison had a solution.
We can't help noticing that you're built like a bull elephant,
She said,
and we've also noticed that you've been looking at our legs and other conspicuous features ever since we got here. For the $300 we owe you, how would you like to try taking on 8 of us at one time? Tony doesn't go in for group frolics, but the rest of us can see to it that you get your money's worth.
there's no power on earth that could have gotten me to turn down that proposition. Ladies, what a sensible idea, I said, and began unbuttoning my shirt. In a moment, they were all peeling off their clothes, all except Tony, who continued to work on her nails as though we weren't even there. The rest of them were like kids getting ready for a nude swim, giggling and prancing around the room. Then they came at me. History is made on East 54th Street, I roared, throwing my arms wide. Then they were all over me, and we were tumbling onto the office daybed, and I was grabbing and kissing everything in sight.
Then the detective has sex with all of the stewardesses at the same time, except for Tony.
A few minutes later, they began untangling themselves and getting back into their clothes. Betty Harrison said,
All right, there's your fee. Now suppose you start earning it.
I had no trouble finding out how Adele and Appleton had left the hotel. One of the elevator operators remembered it. The woman was shivering even though it was warm out, he said. The man had his arm around her as though she might faint, and he had to help her out to the cab. I would say that was about 5:30 a.m. I asked if Adele had said anything in the car going down, and he said she hadn't. She was in a daze and didn't even seem to know where she was. My next stop would normally have been to try to find the cab that had picked them up outside the hotel, but by that time I had already looked over the MAA passenger list and noticed that Leon Appleton had given Valencia Hills as his place of permanent residence. On that basis, it seemed a good idea to check out all the airlines before bothering with cabs. My check of the major airlines didn't turn up anything. But a small outfit named Earth Ocean had sold 2 tickets for a flight to San Francisco to a Mr. and Mrs. Tom Cunningham. And the clerk who had made the sale recognized Adele Hopkins as Mrs. Cunningham from the picture of her the other girls had given me.
Yes, that's the girl, all right, he said positively. But she didn't look that good, I can tell you that. She was having trouble picking up her feet, and she was panting and shivering. Her husband was being very nice to her. You couldn't help noticing that.
So, Appleton and Adele Hopkins were flying as man and wife. Wouldn't the fact that she seemed to be sick make you think twice about taking her aboard?
We're a non-scared airline, and we're hunting for passengers. We'll sell a seat to anyone that's breathing, and if they're not, we'll sell them a box to lie down in.
By then, it seemed obvious enough that Appleton had given Adele Hopkins a tranquilizing drug, which would explain her being cold and shivering, so he could get her to where he wanted to without her fussing. A look at the map showed me that Valencia Hills was less than 40 miles from San Francisco, and chances were looking better and better that that's where he was taking her. I met with my clients, the 9 N.W.A. stewardesses, in their duplex apartment on Fifth Avenue to give them a progress report. It looks to me as though there's a kidnapping aspect to this thing, I said. She doesn't come from wealthy people, does she? I mean, it's not likely that anyone's holding her for ransom, is it? They said no, there was no chance of that. In that case, it's got to be something involving sex. There's always a certain amount of that going on. Girls getting themselves recruited by spotters for different rings. And it's possible that's what's happened to Adele. I better get out to San Francisco and see if I can pick up the trail there. The girls agreed, and I was on a Pan Am flight a few hours later. As soon as we put down, I checked at the Earth-Ocean counter and found that a Mr. and Mrs. Tom Cunningham had gotten off there. The clerk remembered them well. The woman was shivering violently, and she didn't seem to know where she was. Her husband was being very kind and attentive to her. I asked if he had any idea where they'd gone after they left the airport. He said because of the woman's condition and the fact that she was so great-looking, he had watched as they left and seen them get into a car that had apparently been waiting for them. It was sort of a resort station wagon with 5 or 6 seats going across. 2 men were in the front seat. I asked if he'd seen in which direction they'd driven off, but he hadn't. It made sense to me to try Valencia Hills anyway, so I asked around and found the way to get there was by railroad. A little less than 2 hours later, I was getting out onto the station platform of the neatest, cleanest town I'd ever seen in my life. And Jesse Thomas was walking toward me looking like Wild Bill Hickok and saying, "Got business in Valencia Hills?" After I finished talking to the hippies, I went back to the jail. Thomas was talking to someone on the telephone. When he saw me, he said, "I'll have to call you back," and clanked the phone down hard. Then he nodded at it. "That was Mrs. Hollis over at the church. She wanted to remind me about the picnic and bake sale they're having there this Sunday. What's on your mind?" I think maybe I'm going to stick around here for a few days. There are some loose ends on this thing I'm working on. And besides, the clean life you live here might do me some good. What do you have in the line of hotels for me to stay at? "We got the Cherry Arms on Cedar Street." There was a clomping of feet on the stairs from the floor below him, and the deputy Vernon came in looking soggy from the hosing I'd given him. "You really gave me a bad time down there, fellow." "Except for a little water leaking out of your nose and ears, it doesn't seem to have bothered you much." "You mean 'cause I ain't sore? Shucks, what kind of a man would I be to hold a grudge over a little thing like that?" He went out, and I said to Thomas, "I'm feeling a better man already, just being in this healthy atmosphere you got here. How do I get to the Cherry Arms on Cedar Street?" He said it was 5 blocks away, close enough to walk, and told me the direction. And I told him thanks and started walking, and 10 minutes later I was in the lobby of the hotel. 4-story building, probably built around the turn of the century, but clean and well kept, with a blue-eyed, pink-cheeked, middle-aged man beaming at me from behind the desk. "Welcome, stranger. What can we do for you?" I said I wanted a room, and he looked over his register and said, "You can have 318. I said that would be all right, and incidentally I added, "I'm a man of strong needs. Where do I go to get a broad around here?" He looked as though I'd hit him over the head with a shovel, so I said, "Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting what a saintly setup you got here. All right, since you don't have any local talent working here, I'll have to see what I can come up with on my own." He wanted to carry my bag upstairs for me, but I said it wasn't necessary. Being the suspicious type, I'd been wondering if there was a bug in my room, so I began hunting around for it as soon as I was inside. It took me 5 minutes to locate it on the underside of the bureau. But I didn't disturb it or say anything to let on I knew it was there. They probably had one in every room in the place, so there was no point in fussing about it. I just unpacked, put my things in bureau drawers, and went outside. I found an outdoor public telephone a few blocks from the hotel and called my clients in New York. Betty Harrison answered the phone. I said, "I'm not sure, but I think I'm getting close to something here. I'm going to need a girl for bait, though. Any of you feel like taking it on?" Whoever does it, though, she'd have to be able to put on a pretty good act. I've got a room in the Cherry Arms Hotel, and she'd come out to stay with me, but then we'd have a fight and she'd cut out on me. The room's bugged, so we'd be listened in on. And if I'm figuring this right, as soon as she leaves me, she'll be approached by whoever it is that's got Adele, and asked if she'd like to be a hostess in a ski resort.
Just a second, I'll see.
Betty said. I could hear her talking to some of the others in the room, and then she came back on the line.
Tony says she'll do it.
I said, all tight. Let me talk to her to be sure she knows what to do. Tony arrived early the next morning. There were 8 or 9 people in the lobby when she arrived, a couple playing checkers and the rest singing Nearer My God to Thee around the piano. Every one of them stopped what he was doing to stare at her. She was wearing pink slacks and open-toed pink shoes with heels like 6-inch needles and a leopard skin cape, and her black hair was hanging loose and thick to her shoulders, framing her face with its oriental features, her black eyes roving the room. Good to see you, honey. I'd have gone out of my skull if you couldn't make it. We kissed, and you could feel them tightening their lips at us in disapproval. And then I put one arm around her waist and picked up her bag in the other hand, and we went upstairs without a sound in the lobby behind us. As we entered the room, I put my finger to my lips and then pointed to the bottom of the bureau, and she nodded to show she knew what I was getting at. They've got a funny thing about sex out here, honey. They don't believe in it.
Well, you were smart to send for me, but why did you pick a dump like this for us to stay in?
I nodded to tell her she was on the right track. They've got a good room rate here, honey, but I'm kind of light on dough.
Light on dough? She screeched. I traveled 2,500 miles to get out here, and you tell me you're light on dough. What am I getting for this junket?
I don't think I can do a lot better than pay for your plane fare, honey. Maybe I can throw in a couple of bucks.
You can't do any better than pay my plane fare. You'll throw in a couple of bucks. You son of a bitch. I was counting on at least 1,500, and that's aside from the plane fare and anything else. I'm broke, flat broke. What do a couple of bucks matter when you're flat broke?
You'll wake up the neighbors with all that screaming, honey. I got my mouth against hers, pushing her down on the bed and lying partly across her. Her mouth was active under mine, her tongue all sweet and feathery, but I had to say no, no in my head to keep from piling into her. But I thought I'd probably need all the strength I had for whatever lay ahead. So I rolled off her and nodded out to do some more screaming. Then I left, with her still screaming.
If I had the plane fare back to New York, I'd walk right out on you and let you make out the best you can with these Mother Hubbards out here.
I walked down through the lobby, picking up all the shame on you looks again, and went out into the street. I had rented a car the day before and had it parked across from the hotel. I wasn't interested in a drink, but I wanted to put something on the bug that would justify my going away and leaving Tony alone a while so the recruiters could make their pitch. So I drove around for about 45 minutes, which takes some doing in Valencia Hills, since the same Route 51 takes you in and out of town, and there isn't much more to it than that. And then I drove back to the Cherry Arms. The same parking place was waiting for me, but the one in front of it had been taken by a big station wagon, set up like a bus with half a dozen seats running across it. That figured to be the recruiters. The vehicle fitted the description of the one that picked Adele up at the airport in San Francisco. I memorized the license number and then went up to the room, hearing voices from outside before I pushed the door open and went in.
Well, look who's here, Tony jeered. The fastest buck in the East, the last of the big-time spenders.
There were 3 of them. A pair of stocky, frozen-faced men, both of them obviously gunners, and a big man with a wet-looking, smiling face. I had no doubt he was Appleton. Adele Hopkins' date at the Hotel Gascar, the man who had drugged her and brought her out to Valencia Hills. What's going on here? Who are these jokers?
They could be the unholy 3 for all I care. Whoever they are, they've got a great paying job for me as a hostess in a ski resort. And since I'm all hung up here without any money, I'm going to take it.
Now wait a minute, I said, playing my role to a T. I brought you out here because I need you. You can't just cut out on me that way.
Oh, you'll be all right. Just ask her nice, and maybe one of those Mother Hubbards singing the hymn will take you on.
Appleton laughed. I took a step forward as though to grab her to stop her from going. The 2 gunners jumped their hands to their jacket pockets. And I held it. They were quick, all right, and they were jumpy, too. Appleton laughed again and took Tony by the elbow to steer her to the door, which he opened and said,
"What the hell, you can't win them all."
I went to stand beside the window. Tony and the 3 recruiters came out and got in the station wagon. The vehicle was in good shape, well kept up and shiny. The two gunmen got in the front seat, and she got in behind them with Appleton. The wagon started forward, traveling a block and turning westward through a stretch of forest and brush-covered hills. That was as much as I needed to know. I'm a shark with a car and knew I could follow them without putting my lights on, the few stars that were out giving me enough to work with. But just as I was about to open the door, I was pushed in from out in the hall, and Jesse Thomas stepped into the room wearing his badge, his sombrero, a gun in a holster, the works.
"I got a complaint against you, Franklin," he said. "You brought a female person that's not your wife into your room here, didn't you?"
I spoke quickly. "Yeah, I did, but it was just a gimmick to help me track down Adele Hopkins. It's gonna come as a shock to you, Thomas, but you've got some kind of prostitution ring operating here. They've got Adele Hopkins and God knows how many others." His red face went dark.
"We don't have no prostitution ring in Valencia Hills, Franklin."
"Look, their recruiters travel around in a big station wagon, and they've got that female person that was visiting me in it right now. All we've got to do is trail that wagon."
"You got its license number?"
I gave it to him. He said,
"I think you're off your head, Franklin. But we'll go down to the jail and check out that number. If there's anything suspicious about it, I can get that vehicle picked up in 5 minutes just by making a few calls. It don't take a New York cop to do a thing like that."
I thought about arguing, but decided it would just be a waste of time. Not only that, but maybe what he was doing would be the best thing to do. Anyway. All right, but let's move fast.
"Don't tell me how to do my job, Franklin. We get a different kind of problem here than you get in your big cities."
We went downstairs and started through the lobby, and the hymn singers at the piano stopped singing again to watch us. An old lady said, "You going to run him out of town, Jesse?"
"I'll let you know as soon as I decide, Martha,"
he said to me as we went out into the street.
"This ain't New York, Franklin. You want to have doings with a woman that ain't your wife, you don't do it in Valencia Hills."
He had his police jeep outside. We got in and drove over to the jail. There was nobody in his office, but he opened the door leading down to the basement, and his deputy Vernon called, "That you, Jesse?"
"Mr. Franklin's here again, Vernon. See that he don't get you all wet like last time."
Then, before I realized what he was doing, he had that gun of his up against the side of my head, and a second later, I was stumbling down the stairs with Thomas right behind me, rapping his gun against my skull every step of the way, and Vernon meeting me at the bottom and joining in with a gun of his own. It was all business with Thomas. But Vernon was having a good time. He giggled and said,
"Do I see you turning the other cheek, Mr. Franklin?"
And finally, Thomas had to pull him off me and throw me in the cage. Then he said,
"I gotta go pick up our customers, Vernon. They'll be coming in less than an hour. You be sure and get this girl out to the lodge. We got a man coming that says he wants to do a few private things to a hippie. And for $3,500, he's entitled to get what he wants."
"What about Franklin?"
"We'll have to keep him here until I can figure out how many charges we got against him. That might take a couple of months. There's fighting with a policeman, and there's bringing a female person that's not his wife into his room. There's about 7 or 8 others. Give him something to eat so he don't bring no police brutality charges against us, and see that he don't tie you up in the hose again."
Vernon grinned and said, "Don't worry." He followed Thomas upstairs into the office. I wiped blood out of my eyes and saw the hippie girl from a couple of days earlier kneeling in front of me, staring at me and biting her lips. She said, "Are you okay?" My head felt like a warm, wet sponge. Blood was pouring out of it in thick streams, soaking my shirt and pants. It wasn't exactly fun, but it wasn't as bad as it looked either. "What are you doing here?" She took a sweater off for me to mop my head.
Didn't you hear them? They're bringing in a group of customers for their whorehouse, and one of them said he wanted a hippie to do crazy things with. I was way outside the city limits with my friends, but they just came and took me anyway. It was the same two that asked me if I wanted to be a hostess a few days ago, only this time they said there were special deputies, so I guess it's all the same deal. I said I'll kill myself before I let anybody do crazy things with me that way.
"Well, let's fix it so that's not necessary," I told her. But I didn't have an idea in the world how to get out of there. It was about half an hour after Thomas left that Vernon came down from the office carrying bowls of food.
"Real beef, folks," he said cheerfully. "What other jail treats its guests that well?"
He opened a little slot in the cage down close to the ground and pushed them through, then closed it and went back upstairs. He was right about them having real beef in them. You couldn't mistake the smell. But there was another smell there too, although very faint, the smell of some sort of medicine. And then I remembered Betty Harrison saying there'd been a medicine smell in the room at the Hotel Gascar, that Adele Hopkins had stayed with Atkinson, and someone had vomited there too. He's got this food doped. It's a way to keep me under control and get you to where the others are. You think you could fake getting sick? She said she'd try. So we waited about 10 minutes and then threw some of the food out on the floor, bent down, and made ourselves retch. In a couple of minutes, Vernon came back down. "Ah, now that's too bad. Food didn't agree with you." He unlocked the door to the cell, taking his gun out first, but obviously not thinking he'd need it. The girl was all curled up in a corner, making herself retch, and I was lying on my face. He came toward me holding the gun in his right hand, and when I figured he was right above me, I went straight upward, coming up under the gun and ramming my fist into his groin. The gun flew up to the ceiling and clattered on the ground. Vernon bent over, making a gasping sound like air rushing out of a tire. I yanked his hands away from where I'd hit him and hit him there again, and he fell up against the side of the cages with his face all twisted and looking as though he couldn't move. "All right," I yelled. "Give me details. Was that Christian charity of yours?" I bent over to yank his belt off and tighten it around his neck. Then I took the long end in my hand, put him belly down on the floor, put my foot on his back, and yanked up hard. He yelled in pain. He didn't like that one bit. But I had more in mind for him. I was just getting started. I told Vernon to relax, and then, just when he gave me an incredulous stare, I grabbed under both armpits and hauled him off to the bathroom, kicking the door open with my boot. He was beginning to panic, but I knew I'd get him to talk. The next thing he knew, he was in the tub and the water was on full force and he was gagging and sputtering. But I wouldn't let him talk, not yet, not till I was ready to let him tell me what he now wanted to tell me. Very badly. "Vernon," I said calmly, "I'm going to drown you." I pushed him down, the water swirling around and Vernon struggling and making gurgling noises. I let him up after a minute, pulling him by the hair. "Now," I said, "it's your last chance." Vernon talked. He said there were a group of them that had put up a lodge in the woods. They called it Sierra Vista and talked girls into coming out to it by promising them jobs as hostesses. What they described as a fabulous resort. When the girls got there, though, they were given certain tranquilizers to make them manageable, and then they were used as brothel partners by well-to-do businessmen who paid $500 for 3 days with them. Most of the girls were persuaded to come by the job promise, but others turned it down, and a number of these were tranquilized first, as with Adele Hopkins, and then brought to the lodge by Sierra Vista recruiters. "And what about tonight?" I asked, yanking up on the belt again when he was slow in answering. "A group of our customers is coming into San Francisco," he wheezed. "Jesse is going to meet them there and bring them to the lodge by car." "That means we better move along if we're going to get there first," I said. "You're going to do the driving, and I don't want any clowning around. So maybe I better give you a little workout first so you'll know what you're in for." I took the belt off him and spent the next couple of minutes working him around the head and belly with my best kicking toe. The hippie girl whispered all the time, "Oh, that's so ugly. Must you do that?" "Don't worry about him. He's a big believer in the meek inheriting the earth, and when I'm finished here, he's going to be about the meekest thing that ever came down the pike." It was like kicking a rubber mat by then. I got a final one in against his throat, and the girl screamed as the blood spurted out of his mouth like a college pennant. They had a big police van for hauling prisoners behind the station, and that's what we took. Vernon drove, and all I had to do was move a hand or shift in my seat, and he'd flinch. The girl sat on the other side of me. When we'd been driving about an hour and were well into the woods, she said, "Would you let me off here?" "What do you want to get off here for? You're in the middle of no place." "No, I recognize it. My friends are close by." I asked her what she was going to do when she caught up with them. "All I want to do is drink some good wine and try to forget everything I saw here tonight," she said. I had Vernon stop the car and open the door for her to get out. She slid off into the darkness. We left Route 51 a while earlier to get onto something that wasn't much more than a path twisting through the woods. We kept following it in a generally downward direction, as though we were circling toward the bottom of a slope. Finally, Vernon said, "All right, this is it," and braked us to a stop. "What are chances of Thomas and your customers being there already?" "No chance," he said. "You could never make it this fast." "What about getting down there? Is he going to come the same way we did?" "That's the only way there is." "All right." We'll back the van up under these trees overlooking the path, and I'll tie you up so I won't have to worry about you while I'm down there looking over the lodge." He just sighed and shrugged. So we backed the van uphill a little ways till it was about 10 yards above the path and facing down toward it. Then I had him get out and wrap his arms around a pretty good-sized tree. I tied them in front around the wrists and tied a gag in his mouth. Then I started out toward the lodge, tire iron and Vernon's police revolver in hand. I'd only been going about 10 minutes when I saw lights through the trees. That was the lodge, all right. A great-looking place, big, well-built, and well-situated, too. Vernon had said there would be some hunting and skiing for any other customers that wanted it. You could see the spot where they'd located the lodge was perfect for it. About 50 yards from the lodge, a dog rushed me, but I laid it out with the tire iron and went the rest of the way without any trouble. Coming up next to the first-floor window, I looked inside, seeing an enormous room with a bar and a great many soft chairs and couches and a couple of fireplaces. The 3 recruiters were playing cards at a card table, the 2 gunners wearing overcoats, and Appleton wearing a checkered shirt and no tie. Appleton looked a little tense, darting his head around as though he were getting nervous waiting for his customers. There were lights at all the windows upstairs, and by standing back I could see girls in some of the rooms. Or rather, I saw vague shadows moving around behind some of the curtains there, and I figured it had to be the girls. I also saw Thomas's Jeep off to one side of the building, which I took to mean he'd taken the big station wagon to Denver to pick up their customers. After I'd had my look, I hurried back to where I left Vernon in the van. I still wasn't sure what I was going to do, but just as I reached the van, I heard men's voices singing side by side a distance off, harmonizing, and that cut down on my choices. There was really only one way to play my cards from that point out. I got up beside the van and opened the door so I could get a hand on the stick shift. It was in reverse to keep it from rolling downhill. I got a foot inside the car where I could bring it down on the clutch in a hurry. And then I stayed like that, waiting. The voices of the men singing grew louder. I could hear the sound of the station wagon's motor grinding a little because it was moving over rough terrain. Then I saw the first gleam of headlights. It was with the station wagon a yard short of being directly in front of me that I put my foot down on the clutch, put the stick into neutral, and got the van rolling. My timing couldn't have been better. The van lumbered smack into the side of the wagon. The wagon swerved around sideways, and I ran around to the driver's seat, the side the van hadn't hit. As I reached it, Thomas was getting out, his face as wooden as ever under his sombrero.
I guess I should have killed you back there, Franklin,
he was saying. Yeah, that was a mistake. I lunged straight into him and swung at his head with the tire iron. He hunched a shoulder up to take the impact, but the iron bounced up over it and continued on into his jaw, and he fell up against me, clawing for his gun. I had him by the shirt and began hitting him with the iron, and each shot sent a jolt up my arm, so I knew I was making good contact. 7 or 8 blasts straight down on his skull, and then I let go of his shirt and stepped back, letting him fall there, unconscious. Most of the customers had gotten out of the wagon by then, and they were standing around looking dazed. I shouted, "Look, you man, I don't know what the sheriff here told you about the girls you'd be partying with, but I doubt if he's told you it's a white slave operation." A murmur of anger and fear went through them. I shouted, "That's right. That's something to be worried about. Most of you have wives and families and responsible jobs, don't you? Getting yourself a little tail from time to time is one thing, but white slavery is something else. The girls are kidnapped. The girls are drugged. Thomas didn't tell you any of that, did he?" "The son of a bitch," one man said. "I can't take that kind of a chance." Others nodded and said the same thing. "Well, there he is," I said, pointing to Thomas on the ground. "And here's another member of his group, tied to this tree here. Hang on to the 2 of them for me until I get back. Then we can see about getting you back to San Francisco and on planes back to where you came from. Maybe we can still keep the whole thing as quiet as though it never happened." Tony, Adele, and I went back to New York by plane. They were both hospitalized in Frisco first to recover. I waited there until they were released. We went to the airport from the hospital by cab. Adele sat in the front with the driver, while Tony and I finished up what we'd started in the Cherry Arms Hotel in Valencia Hills, draping a couple of coats over us in the back seat for privacy.
If you enjoyed this somewhat sleazy, gross exhibit and you want to support the Mutant Museum, please consider donating, either on Ko-fi or as a regular Patreon supporter like all of these amazingly cool people do. Particularly Break System BSC, Zachary Snowden-Smith, and Michael Fattori, and you'll be able to see your own name up here on the very next video for as little as $1 a month. Please also consider following me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd, as well as buying one or both of my ebooks. Links to all of these are in the description, and thank you for being you.